In this video, I'm going to show you how to add dimensions to a drawing. And then in future videos, I will show you how to apply styles and different techniques and different ways that dimensions can be added to a drawing, or the different possible methods that can be employed by any one company. First thing we're going to do is we're going to be adding objects to a drawing, dimensions in this case, so it's always a good idea to make the correct layer current first. I will pick dimensions and make that layer current, and now I'm going to just go to the annotation panel on the home tab, and I typically grab my dimensions from here. In a minute we'll come back to this command, but this way I have a little bit more complete control. I want to place first off some linear dimensioning commands, and I'll pick this, and AutoCAD goes into the mode of prompting me for the first extension line origin, and then it'll prompt me for the second extension line origin. And then there's some different options that we can employ depending upon what the previous options may have been. So I'll just pick my first extension line origin. I'll come down here and pick it, and then I will go up and pick I'll pick the top of this line and dimension it vertically. And AutoCAD knows that it's a vertical dimension, and it places it. It doesn't give me a 0 horizontal dimension because there's no difference in the X values. It says, geez, they're probably looking to place a vertical dimension, so that's what I'll do. And now all I have to do is place where that dimension needs to go, how far away from the object it needs to go, and when I pick, I'm all done with dimensioning. So you just have to pick where you want a dimension from, where you want a dimension to, and where you want to place the dimension. It's pretty much that simple. I'll delete this and do it a little bit differently. In this instance, I will recognize the fact that I have a single object spanning the distance that I want to dimension. So I'll grab linear, and instead of picking 2 points, each of its endpoints, you'll see that as a default, meaning if I hit enter, it'll prompt me to select an object. So I'll hit enter, and it prompts me to select an object, and then when I select that object, it'll automatically attach the extension lines to each endpoint. Is there an advantage? I don't really think there is, because I have to hit enter and then pick the object. That's 2 things I had to do. To pick an endpoint and another endpoint, that's 2 things I had to do. No real advantage. So whichever method of placing that dimension seems more comfortable to you, go ahead and use it. I'll leave that one in there. I will now grab linear once again and dimension the overall length of this part, and I'll pick here, and I'll pick up here. That's the outermost edge, the lowermost edge, or lowermost vertex, I guess I should say. And now AutoCAD has to make a decision. Are you looking to place a horizontal dimension, or if I kind of drag it out here, I could be looking to create a vertical dimension, depending upon which direction I place it. Now I do want to place the horizontal dimension, so I'll go ahead and pick it. Next, let's say I wanted to dimension the distance in from this corner to this little notch that's going on. I can pick linear once again. I can even hit enter and pick this object and come down. That's a good thing. If I want to dimension the size of the gap here, I can grab linear once again. Now I could hit enter because the distance is spanned by this line, but it would the extension lines would attach to each endpoint, and then they would be over the top of these lines when I place it down here, and we don't want to do that. So in this instance, you never want your not in this instance, but ever, you don't want your extension lines over the top of object lines. So in this instance, I'll pick an endpoint and an endpoint and place it down here. And then if I want that to be right in line with it, I'll even put my arrowhead right in line with the other arrowhead. So now, if I zoom way in, you can see that those are perfect endpoint to endpoint arrowhead dimensions. Next thing I can do is dimension the height of this notch. I'll grab my linear dimensioning tool again and dimension from here, kind of the outermost bounding point of the notch, and then the uppermost bounding point of the notch, and pull this over here. Now I have to make a decision. Is this going to be too close to the object? If I decide yeah it is, I'll pull this out and put this right on top of here. Okay, not a great idea, but it's right on top there. Now what I really have to do is move this dimension out, and this is where those little blue grips that kind of keep showing up. I'm not going to go into detail on grips, but they're very advantageous. When I pick this and I pick a grip that's attached to the arrowhead, that just lets me move that whole dimension out a little bit further and relocate where it's located in reference to the object itself. So that's your linear dimensioning tool for placing vertical and horizontal dimensions. Underneath here, if I pull this down, these are all the different dimensioning tools. We're going to go through quite a few of these, not all of them. We're going to skip these bottom two here. But if I do aligned is it's a linear dimensioning tool also, but it's a true length dimensioning tool, not necessarily vertical and horizontal. What I'm getting at is that it's going to prompt me for the first extension line origin. Let's take a look at this angled line right here. And I go and I dimension from that extension, that end point of that line to this end point of that line. And now the angle of the dimension line will fall in line with those two pick points. Okay? And I can pull this up. And there's that dimension. That's the true length of that line. So I want to point out that linear or that aligned dimensioning tool. You don't need it too often because most of the time angular lines are more often dimensioned horizontally and vertically. Either or one endpoint, I should say, is locked in horizontally, and then we might dimension the angle that that line is at. So the first thing I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is pull this out because I'm going to use another dimension line to locate that endpoint. So I'm going to pull this a little further away to give me room in between them. And then I'm going to do my linear dimensioning command and dimension from here to the endpoint. There we go. And now I'm going to use the angular dimensioning tool and dimension the angle between this line and that line. And if I put it here, it gives me that obtuse dimension. If I pull it here, it gives me that more acute dimension. So whatever might be more appropriate. In mechanical drafting, it's a great idea to keep your dimensions off the part. So if I can not, unless there's some reason I need that obtuse dimension, it's a better idea to maybe pull that out here. But that's up to your drafting needs, not AutoCAD's. All right, so there's that dimension placed. The last two dimensions that I want to talk about, or the last two dimensioning commands I want to talk about, are radius and diameter. The radius tool is typically used to dimension the radius of an arc. I'll pick that, and all you have to do is pick the arc, and AutoCAD senses what that radius is and asks you to place the leader elbow point at some spot, and I pick it. And if I zoom in on here so I can read it better, you see that it labels that as an R3. That's the radius of that arc. Lastly, I want to talk about the diameter tool. I pick diameter. Diameter is typically used to dimension the diameter of circles, which are very often holes or shafts. Anytime we have a full circle, it's proper to use the diameter tool on it. When we have an arc, it's proper to use the radius tool. But there's reasons why we might want to use a radius tool on a circle, and there's reasons why we may want to use a diameter tool on an arc. But for the most part, diameter for circles, radius for arcs. And we can see that when we do that, we get the little diameter symbol and we get the diameter of that arc. So that is just an overview of the dimensioning tools, the very basic dimensioning tools: linear, aligned, angular, and radius and diameter, your most common tools. Lastly, I'll go ahead and erase all of these just so that we don't have any confusion going on. Pick all of these. I'm picking them all ahead of time, and then I'm just going to hit the delete key and they're gone. I want to talk about this tool right here, which is kind of like all of those tools that we've been working with kind of nested in there, and it just kind of figures out what you're wanting to do based on picks that you make. So I'll pick this auto dimensioning type tool, and you can see that all of those options, we haven't talked about baseline or continue. I'll leave that as like homework that you can play with. But if I just pick a point and pick another point, it understands that you're looking to place a linear dimension. If I pick a point, if I pick diameter or dimension, that auto dimension tool here, if I pick this point and that point, it knows that you're wanting to pick an aligned dimension. But if I kind of drag this out this way, I can turn that into a vertical or a horizontal dimension too, just by where I end up dragging that. If I notice that the command stays active also, you can just keep using it. That's weird, it wants the first extension line. Oh, but if I pick a circle, it will automatically go into the diameter option. If I pick an arc, even though I don't really have a pick box going, as soon as I get there, it kind of flips to a pick box, and it senses that you're picking an arc, and it automatically defaults to the radius tool. So this is kind of nice, but it does make bad decisions at times, and it makes it hard to figure out. If I use these tools, I know exactly what I'm looking to do, and I'm able to do it a little bit easier. So those are your basic dimensioning tools.